Chris Lee of Southeastern 14, joined by a very special guest today, one of the best guys in the sports media business. He is covering a beat that has just been lit for the last year, every way you look. He's Andrew Hutchinson. He covers Arkansas at HawgBeat.com. Andrew, thanks for joining us today.
Yeah, thanks for having me on.
Lots going on in Arkansas. We're going to do baseball today, though. Arkansas has really come on strong, I think, in everybody's opinion. The second best team in the SEC, best team in the West, leading the West, I think, by 3 games. And now the Hogs have a very crucial series with an A&M club that's pretty hot in its own right.
Yeah, it's a big-time series. I mean, you mentioned the 3-game lead in the West for Arkansas. You feel pretty comfortable about that, especially since you're just already halfway through the SEC slate. But A&M, I mean, you're just one sweep away from being not in first place, and A&M is playing really, really well. I know they just put it on Dallas Baptist, a midweek game. That's a really good Dallas Baptist team. So Arkansas's got to keep playing their A game, or else they could easily let this SEC West lead slip. And you mentioned number 2 team in the SEC. Everyone's chasing Tennessee. I mean, I don't think anyone's going to dispute that they're the number 1 team, not just in the SEC, but in the country. Going to be tough to catch them for the regular season crown overall. But Arkansas is in a good spot, with 5 weekends left to maybe capture the division title for, I believe this would be the 4th straight year that they would have captured at least a share of it. So it's a pretty impressive run they're on here at Arkansas.
Yeah, that's a good prelude into where I'm going next, because it has been a crazy last 10, 12 months for Arkansas baseball. We know about the run Arkansas had a year ago. Kevin Kopps probably would have been 1,000,000-to-1 odds to win National Player of the Year, but we know that story. It was just tremendous to watch. And Arkansas loses several key hitters. It loses Kopps. And then before the season, loses Peyton Pallette, its best arm, and maybe certainly a top 5 arm in the SEC, maybe the top arm in the SEC if you're the Major League Baseball Scouting Bureau. But you look up here, Arkansas is at the halfway point, right on pace to repeat last year's 22-8 record in the league. What a remarkable job Dave Van Horn has done. I know he doesn't have the big prize yet. I think that's coming one day. Maybe it's even this year. But what a remarkable job he has done to have this program in this shape.
Yeah, because every year I just feel like, well, there's no way they're going to be as good as last year, because they were so good. I mean, it'd be really hard to build on it. I said that after the 2018 team that finished runner-up and was so close to that national title, and sure enough, the 2019 team makes it back to the College World Series with arguably a better resume than the 2018 team. And then, obviously 2020 was eliminated by the pandemic, but in 2021, I'm like, well, there's no way that they could be as good as 2019. And all they do is win every SEC series and are basically number 1 all year. Come up short from Omaha, so everyone kind of remembers that a little bit differently than I think they should. And I'm like, well, there's no way they're going to be better. I mean, they're losing Kevin Kopps, you're losing Patrick Wicklander, you're losing some other key arms, some other key bats. You get some guys back that you maybe didn't expect to have back, like a Jalen Battles and a Brady Slavens and guys like that, and maybe some unexpected guys make it to campus from the high school ranks, like a Peyton Stovall and a Hagan Smith. And all Arkansas is arguably a better, more complete team than last year's team. I mean, you lose Kevin Kopps, arguably the greatest relief pitcher in the history of college baseball, and they're a better bullpen, which is just wild to think about.
Well, and you know what's crazy, too? If we had said 2 months ago, Arkansas is going to be where it is, we would have both said, and you tell me if I'm wrong, I think we would have said Robert Moore is going to have a better year than last year. Brady Slavens is going to have a huge year. Caden Wallace is going to have a monster year. Like, we would have named the script for it to happen. Stovall, I think we all thought he was going to have a better year. Like, none of the things that you would have said have happened on offense. Not that they've been bad, right? But there's more in the tank for these guys. I think that's what's been the craziest thing to me, Andrew, is just seeing that they've done it without their guys. They've been good, but I think we all know there's another gear to some of these kids than they've shown so far.
Yeah, Dave Van Horn has said a couple of times that they're not playing their best baseball yet. And that's
Yeah.
kind of a cliche thing for coaches to say, but I think he's exactly right. I mean, the pitching staff has been incredible, and that's something we did not expect. I mean, I thought they would be definitely solid and good enough with what I thought was going to be one of the most elite offenses in the country. And it's been the exact opposite. They've had one of the most elite, pitching staffs in the country, and the offense has kind of been just okay. And I think that it's still there. I mean, we're starting to see some guys like Brady Slavens is starting to swing the bat well the last couple of weeks, and uh, you know uh, Braden Webb is a guy that really, I think he hit below the Mendoza line last year, but he had a bunch of home runs. Basically, anytime he hit the ball, it went over the fence. This year, the good news is he's actually hitting the ball a little bit more, and it's still going over the fence at a similar rate. And he's been just on a tear since about, I don't know, about midway through the season. He started out the year 0 for 23, but has been just scorching hot since then. Brady Slavens was under the Mendoza line, and now he's up close around 300. And so those guys are producing. But Robert Moore, the preseason unanimous All-American, he's not the worst batting average on the team. He's still got a decent slugging percentage. He's still hitting for some power, and he also has a pretty solid on base percentage because I think he leads the team in walks. But he's only hitting like 244 or something like that. Really surprising numbers. And Peyton Stovall's just ahead of him at like 254. That's a guy we thought was going to hit the ball at a better clip than he has. So basically, it's been exactly the opposite of what we expected, with the exception of the defense. I thought Arkansas was going to have an elite defense, like a fielding team, and that has been the case. They are, I think, just before yesterday's midweek game, I think they were third nationally in fielding percentage, and they've just made some tremendous plays on the infield. I think it's the best infield I've ever seen under Dave Van Horn, and that's a pretty lofty statement.
Yeah, he's had some good ones. I look at them the last 2 weeks. It's been a little bit odd because they get beat by Florida, which I think was in Gainesville, correct?
Yes.
And then they come back and they sweep LSU, an LSU team that I think is better than people think it is because it can pitch a little bit more. Just rewind the last couple of weeks and what you've seen of note in that stretch.
Yeah, so against Florida, there was all this concern. One, they had won, I think, 13 SEC series in a row up to that point. They were really getting close to the record. I think the record's 14 or 15. So they were knocking on the door there. They go to Gainesville. They beat Hunter Barco. That was a game that I was just like, man, I don't know how they could win that game. That's a tough lefty. Arkansas doesn't hit left-handers that well. So I just thought maybe that would be a game they lose, and they go out and they win that game. And I'm like, holy cow, are they about to do this again? And they really struggle the next 2 days out. Hagan Smith and Jackson Wiggins turn in probably their worst starts of the season, and they just happen to do it in back-to-back games. They both gave up, I think, 7 runs in under 5 innings. Just did not go well in Gainesville. And they still, even with that, had a chance to win the rubber match. I think it was 7-7 going into the 8th inning or something, and they gave up a couple of runs to lose that game. So it was a tough series, but probably not the worst thing to happen because a lot of the guys on this team, when you factor in that 2020 there was no conference season, 2021 they went 10-0 in the series, and they had not lost a series yet this year. A lot of the guys on the team had never experienced an SEC series loss, and so they kind of learned from that, and they came out and played really, really well against LSU, against one of the better lineups, especially the top of that lineup with Dylan Cruz and Jacob Berry and Trey Morgan. I mean, that and Cade Doty, that is a incredible, top of the order. And Arkansas managed it. They only gave up 6 runs the entire weekend. The pitching was phenomenal. Hagan Smith, after having one of arguably his worst start of the season, the freshman bounces back and throws 7 shutout innings. Was phenomenal. Really good relief outings by guys like Brady Tigert, Arkansas's now closer, a true freshman. Evan Taylor's been kind of a surprise guy, left-hander out of the bullpen. All those guys were really phenomenal. And as we talk right now, the Arkansas bullpen has gone, I want to say, 22 straight innings without allowing an earned run. Wow. That is going into the second Arkansas State midweek game. So it could change, But that it's an incredible run they're on, and so they did just enough offensively. They're not hitting home runs like we saw last year when they led the country in long balls. Uh, Nowhere close to that this year, but they're probably a better just overall hitting team, and they make teams pay when they draw walks or they reach on an error or hit by pitch or something. They've got a knack for making the other team pay, and that's what we saw. They do just enough. Plus, I can't say enough about the defense on this team. The fielding is incredible. That was honestly may have been the difference against LSU. LSU's infield really struggled, is not that great in the field, and the plays they didn't make were plays that Arkansas was able to make, and that led to Arkansas being able to win all 3 games.
Yeah, here's the math on that. In SEC games, Arkansas has committed 7 errors. Opponents have committed 21. That's probably accounting for a run or two right there. But let's talk A&M, because I don't know that any of us knew what to make of Jim Schlossnagle's club coming into this year. It didn't feel like Rob Childress left A&M in a great spot. They rebuilt through transfers. Troy Claunch, the catcher from Oregon State. Jack Moss, the first baseman from Arizona State. Dylan Rock, center fielder from UTSA. In the bullpen, the kid from Stanford, Jacob Palish, who's been good at times. Micah Dallas, the transfer from Tech. I mean, it seems like they have really hit a lot of spots in the transfer market. And by the looks of things, and I know it was a little bit skewed by that game on, Saturday, which was the final game of the series when Georgia ran out of pitching. But this team, to me, looks like one that's really starting to put it together about now.
Yeah, I think they're really close to being on the verge of being ranked. And I mean, winning a midweek game against Dallas Baptist will help that. And if they can win a series against Arkansas this weekend in College Station, I think they're definitely a top 25 team. And it's a little bit weird in the SEC this year. It's almost like Arkansas and Tennessee are head and shoulders above everyone else. I mean, even Vanderbilt is not the typical Vanderbilt that we're used to seeing. I want to say Ole Miss. I think Ole Miss and Mississippi State are the bottom 2 teams in the West. Like, who saw that coming? So and LSU isn't LSU that we've come to expect, and Florida isn't the normal Florida. So there's an opening there for teams like an Auburn or an Alabama or an A&M to step up and fill that void, and they do seem to be coming together. I'm anxious to see how this weekend goes, because it feels like it's maybe a strength on strength kind of matchup. A&M's got a really salty lineup. I mean, those guys they have, they're hitting, I think, close to 300. And as I said earlier, Arkansas's pitching has been really, really good. So it's going to be a good test for both of those, and it may come down to which team's quote unquote weakness does better. I mean, can Arkansas's bats live up to their potential, or can A&M's arms maybe live up to their potential? Guys that maybe aren't pitching as well as we probably thought they would. Can they put it together this weekend? So really fascinating matchup, and I know A&M fans will be really fired up because, as I said, they're right there knocking on the door of being a top 25 team.
Hutch, you mentioned Arkansas struggling against lefties. A&M will start 2 righties, I would expect, in Nathan Detmer and Micah Dallas, and Ryan Prager, a lefty, although he has very much struggled. You look at the bullpen, Will Johnson has thrown 5 scoreless innings in SEC play. Then you go down the line where Palish, who pitched in big spots for Stanford a year ago, is a lefty, probably, and Joseph Menifee too. He's not pitched well. So anything in the lefty mix that gives him issues? I don't know that there's anything out of the ordinary here, but looking at from a matchup standpoint, you mentioned Arkansas struggling against lefties, but it looks to start out they'll see 2 righties in terms of who begins those games.
I think that'll help Arkansas because they do hit righties better. It's just something about these lefties, and typically the ones that they struggle against. I mentioned Hunter Barco. They did all right, pretty good against Barco, and that's an elite lefty who's probably going to be a first round draft pick. It's these lefties that are crafty lefties, as they like to say. These guys that aren't necessarily have great numbers. I mean it every year, it never fails. There's some midweek team that comes in with some lefty that's throwing 85 miles an hour and has like an 8.60 ERA and comes in and throws 5 scoreless against Arkansas. It never fails. It happens at some point. So uh, it's going to be interesting, if these lefties, I'm not sure kind of what their pitch arsenal is and stuff like that, but the fact that they are throwing righties to start out, those two games as you mentioned, that should help and play into Arkansas's favor. Um, but again, who knows? I mean, with it being on the road, that's another thing you got to throw in there. I'm expecting it to be a very competitive series for sure.
Yeah, I think I'm looking at when Arkansas pitches. I mean, Dylan Rock has been phenomenal. 477 on base mark in the league, 855 slugging. Claunch 429 on base. Ryan Targak 431. Brett Minich 438. Jack Moss, Cole Kaler each 348. But those guys have hit before in their previous stops. They get Trevor Warner back, who some people think is one of their better players. This is a team that, man, it scored how many runs against Georgia? I mean, 23 in the in the closing game from memory. I think it was won the opener 8-1, and I think lost the middle game 4-3. I mean, that's roughly 35 runs over a weekend against SEC pitching. These guys have not only been productive, they've been red hot recently.
Yeah, it's a scary thing to think about, LSU was also a really good offensive team, and Arkansas managed to navigate that. If Arkansas can hold A&M to 6 runs total this weekend, like they did this past weekend, I will be shocked. Just because that's just so tough to do. Hagan Smith, when he has struggled, it's been away from Baum Stadium, and this weekend is not in Fayetteville. So perhaps the freshman struggles in game 2. Jackson Wiggins has been a little bit sporadic. He's one of those guys that it seems like he gets better as the game goes on, and you just hope that if that happens, is A&M going to jump on for 5 runs in the first 2 innings, and then you're in a big hole in a potentially big game 3. The one guy I'm not as concerned about, which I'll say this and he'll have his worst start of the year, but Connor Nolan has been so consistent in that ace role. I mean, he is truly a bona fide SEC ace. I crunched the numbers the other day. He actually has better numbers through however many starts it is now in the SEC than Blaine Knight in 2018, Isaiah Campbell in 2019,
Wow.
and Patrick Wicklander last year. Guys that were all high caliber MLB draft prospects. Connor Nolan isn't being talked about like that with the pro prospects, but his numbers, if you just take a blind resume, are better than those 3 guys. And so it's going to be another tough challenge for him, but he's a guy that's been around the block. He's a senior. This is his 4th year in college. I think he's up for the task, but I do worry with that vaunted lineup of Texas A&M, what the 2 younger guys that may look like against them. Especially the freshman Hagan Smith. His 2 worst starts were at Round Rock early in the year against a really good Stanford team, and then of course on the road at Florida. Texas A&M kind of fits that bill, so we'll see how it goes.
Yeah, and the big thing for Nolan, 36 strikeouts, 5 walks in league play, and just 1 home run allowed. In fact, 2 doubles, no triples. So when people hit him, they're not getting very far with it. But I want to ask you about road play, because venue is going to be a big deal. Arkansas just 3-3 on the road so far. What do we know about these guys away from home? I know you talked about it a little bit earlier, but how does the ballpark play into this weekend?
That's a great question, because they have struggled a little bit away from home. They did lose 1 game at Missouri, which Missouri's probably a team you think, oh, well, maybe you can sweep them, but SEC sweeps are difficult, as you know, and Florida's a tough place to play, and I don't know if it's necessarily effective they struggle on the road, or if they just don't get the boost that Baum-Walker Stadium provides by playing at home. I really feel like this team, more than maybe not quite as much as the 2018 team, but it just feels like the 2018 team and this year's team really feed off of that home crowd, and it's just not quite the same. But I do wonder. I mean, you look at the places where they've lost at. I mean, Missouri, they didn't have but maybe 800 people there. Florida, they've got a decent crowd, but I don't think it's gonna
It's
pale
not
in
Arkansas.
comparison.
Yeah.
It's not Arkansas, and it's not even A&M. I think A&M is probably gonna have what 7,000-8,000 people
Hmm.
there. Maybe they can kind of feed off of that energy, uh, but I do wonder if there is something to it. I mean, think back to the 2018 team. They won every series at home and lost every series on the
Wow.
road, and they still won the division because they were that dominant at home. I think they went 14-1 in SEC play at home, and then they went 1-2 in every series on the road, whatever that comes. I think 5-10. So it's a pretty remarkable difference. I don't know if it's quite that drastic with this year's team, uh, uh, but I think this week it'll tell us, if it's going to be that kind of trends, throughout the rest of the way. I think they've got Auburn and Alabama still on the road. Can't think of who else, but I mean, it's going to be interesting to follow, especially with this A&M series.
Yeah, here's the funny thing about A&M. 14-7 at home, 8-4 on the road, exact same winning percentage. So 1-2 neutral. But yeah, it's weird. Now they lost a series against Penn, which is 38 in the RPI, so that's not terrible. Early in the year, that's one of their losses. The last two home series, I think they both won though. Or no, I'm sorry, they lost to Auburn in Bluebell Park in a pretty close series a couple weeks ago. So venue hasn't seemed to really matter for the Aggies so far.
Yeah, it's weird how it affects different teams, different ways. I mean, I do know that they have a great, environment there. That's a place that I would like to go visit, that park down there. So it's just kind of fascinating to see how different teams have respond differently, to the environment. I don't know if it's a matter of a maturity thing. Like I do know that you mentioned all the transfers that they have. So these are all guys that have been around the block and played before. Maybe they don't get phased by the road, and so they just are the same whether they're in the friendly confines of their home ballpark or at the a hostile environment on the road. That's just kind of a working theory, but I don't know. I haven't really completely dived into the numbers yet to see if that's actually the case.
How far is that from Fayetteville and where Arkansas fans travel for that series?
It's a pretty lengthy drive. That's actually one trip I haven't ever made because the football game is always in Arlington,
Yeah.
at AT&T Stadium. But it's a doable drive, and I know Arkansas fans. There will be a group that travels. It's not going to be like a super big crowd. It's not going to be like Missouri, where I think Arkansas fans might have outnumbered Missouri fans, but that's because I don't know if Missouri fans know they have a baseball team.
Right.
But there's going to be a little crowd there, but it's definitely going to be dwarfed, in my opinion, by the Aggies.
Not a lot of interesting stops, I guess, between Fayetteville and College Station, are there?
Yeah, I'm not sure which way. I don't know if you'd go down through like Texarkana and go, or if you may go through Dallas. I'm not sure the route but yeah, I hope that eventually the football game is going to be moved back to a home and home, so that way every other year I can make that trip. Because again, the 12th man, they do have a really good environment down there, and I'd like to experience it in person.
Let's talk SEC for just a minute before I let you go. What has really stood out to you recently of late in this league besides Arkansas and A&M?
It just seems like there's a lot of parity in the
Yeah.
league outside of Tennessee and Arkansas. Like it seems like those two teams are up at the top, and then everyone else, it's just really hard to figure out. Okay, well, who belongs in the top 25? They're going to just kind of eat each other alive. And usually you think like, okay, well, there's not just the top two in Tennessee and Arkansas. But usually you think, okay, well, Vanderbilt's going to be right there, or Mississippi State just won a national championship and they're struggling. I think they're under 500 in
Mm-hmm.
SEC play, or right there. Ole Miss was a team that was preseason, or maybe not preseason, but they were number one in the country just a few weeks ago, and they've just fallen off the face of the earth. And then you got a team like South Carolina, who has beaten three teams that have been number one at some point this year. They've won series against Texas, won series against Vanderbilt and Ole Miss,
Yeah.
and then they're under 500 against everyone else. It just is weird this year, and I don't know what the cause is. I don't know if it's because it's an older league. You got guys like at Arkansas, like a Brady Slavens and a Jalen Battles back for another year that you maybe wouldn't have had in a normal college baseball year. I don't know if that's playing into it or what, but that's my main takeaway from the SEC is just how weird the season has been and how much parity there has been. Teams that we thought were going to be terrible, in Alabama and Auburn, maybe not terrible, but at the bottom of the standings are not there, and teams that are generally at the top of the standings, like a Mississippi State and like an Ole Miss, they're at the bottom. It's just a very weird upside down year.
Yeah, that's been my takeaway too, because it feels like, throw Tennessee and Arkansas out of it, it's almost like any other team in this league could beat any other team at any given time. And I mean, even having said that, Florida beat Arkansas 2 weeks ago. After getting swept by Georgia the week before. I've never remembered a year like this where it just was that up in the air every weekend. Now, I think that's going to start changing a little bit, because I think you're starting to see the effect of some pitching injuries in Kentucky, some places like that where, like, okay, maybe it was hanging on by a thread a little bit, and I don't know how much longer this can go, but I can't remember a year where the league was like this at the halfway point. Can you?
I can't. And the thing I keep coming back to is I almost want to say that the league is down, where
Yeah.
it may not be as good as it usually is. But then I think back to the basketball season that just finished up. Everyone was like, "Well, the ACC sucks. Like they're terrible. They none of these teams are any good." And then next thing you know, Duke and North Carolina are in the Final Four. You got Miami making a run. You got all these different teams that in that conference, are end up doing well in the postseason. I'm wondering if it's going to be similar to that. I wonder if we see maybe not as many SEC teams host that we usually see,
Mm-hmm.
but they may go somewhere as a 2 seed and knock off that host and make it into the super regionals and then maybe even to Omaha. That's kind of what I'm thinking might happen, just because the SEC generally is so good and they have so much talent that compared to other leagues. So I'm not quite ready to hit the panic button and just say, oh, the SEC is terrible, because I think the postseason might be where the SEC kind of shows its muscles.
Yeah, I think Baseball America this week, I looked at it this morning, I believe had 9 teams from the league in. I think maybe only 3 hosts, though. Tennessee, Arkansas, Georgia. That's from memory. I think Ole Miss, Mississippi State loser probably plays its way out this weekend, barring a miracle. Either the rest of the season or in Hoover. I mean, but you've even got, I don't think it's going to happen, but crazier things have happened too than one of Missouri, South Carolina, Kentucky getting hot and making a regional. I mean, Missouri's computer numbers is 28 in the RPI today. So just get a few wins, get to 14. I don't know if that's doable. That's a tournament team probably. I think that's the thing. I think that the teams at the bottom of the league were better than we thought, and outside of Arkansas, Tennessee, that top half of the league just has not looked as strong as we anticipated.
Yeah, and I think you mentioned another key point earlier, all the pitching injuries that have happened in this league. It seems like every team. I mean, Arkansas with Paulette, I guess Barco got hurt this past weekend, and it's unfortunate because you don't want to see any of these guys go down. You want to see the best guys play, and also the teams that are at the bottom. Like Missouri. I remember Arkansas series up there a couple of weeks ago. That team can swing the bat. I was impressed with their offense. Now they almost in that series at least looked like the Bad News Bears defensively, and they didn't exactly pitch it well. Didn't have a ton of pitching depth. But they could swing it, and so I wasn't super surprised that they were able to win a series against Kentucky and steal a game here or there from teams like Arkansas, and so yeah, it's weird, and I don't know, it would be very weird for me to see a team like a Kentucky or a Missouri make a run and make the postseason. But it also wouldn't just be, super completely surprising either.
Yeah, I mean, Kentucky's got series wins over Georgia and TCU. So, again, that's some of these marquee series wins that the league has put together have come from, maybe 2 teams that won't even make Hoover, which is just crazy. But, Hutch, any parting thoughts on the Arkansas A&M series or anything else around the SEC?
I think that my biggest thing that I want to stress about Arkansas is just how much pitching depth they have. I know I touched on this earlier, and I'll make this statement again because I just think it's so incredible to hear myself verbalize it. that Kevin Kopps is gone and the bullpen is better.
Yeah.
And they've just got so many more arms. You've got, Evan Taylor, I mentioned, has been a surprising guy. Zebulon Vermillion has been really solid and kind of living up to his potential this year. You've got Brady Tigert, who was a heralded recruit, didn't necessarily look super great during the preseason, but all he's done is evolve into your definite closer, the guy you go to in critical situations late in the game. And so that they've got multiple arms, several guys that are kind of fighting for that next spot. Zach Morris threw, I think, 2 2/3 scoreless innings against LSU out of the bullpen in Game 3, and so they've got guys, and that gives me a little bit more comfort because last year it was like, oh, well, if Kevin Kopps, yeah, he could pitch you a complete game essentially. That's what they tried to do in NC State in the Super Regional. But you're eventually going to need to have someone else, and they didn't really have anyone else. They didn't have starting pitching last year. This year's starting pitching has been incredibly consistent, giving you 5+ innings pretty much every start, and it's just different from last year. So the bullpen hasn't been as taxed as it was last year. I think the bullpen at this point has thrown like 20 fewer innings in the SEC play compared to last year through the first 5 series. It's a significant difference. So very, very interesting to see that that's been the case for Arkansas, considering that was probably, when we talked before the season, my number one biggest question, and that's been arguably their biggest strength at this point.
Well, and I'm glad you brought that up because I meant to mention this. Last weekend, Jax Wiggins goes 5 1/3 in his start. Connor Nolan goes 6 in his start. Hagan Smith goes 7 in his. It's not often you see 3 guys in this league that can go 5+ anymore and throw well at doing it. And that just gives you such a leg up on your opponent going into Saturday and Sunday.
Yeah, usually you don't have a Sunday pitcher of the caliber of Jackson Wiggins.
Yeah.
I mean, this guy's a guy to go out there, throw 99, and has first-round talent in his arm. He needs to be a little bit more consistent, and he does allow base runners probably at a higher clip than you would like out of a starting pitcher. But considering he's a Game 3, he's phenomenal when you factor in that. I mean, you'd be a little bit more concerned if he was your ace, and he has ace potential, but he has been just really good in that Game 3 spot and really gives you confidence if you do have a rubber match that you're going to at least have a puncher's chance.
Yeah, if you have a quality 3, that's more than 90% of what the college baseball world has, including some really good teams in this league. So, Hutch, thanks for joining us. We can find you on Twitter at NWA Hutch, and tell folks about where your coverage for this series this weekend will be.
Yeah, so you go check it out at HawgBeat.com. That's the Arkansas rival site. We'll have game threads, live commentary on the message board, our premium message board, the Trough, and we'll have full breakdowns as always after each game, as well as post-game Zoom interviews with Dave Van Horn and maybe a couple of players if we're lucky. So you can go check that out at HawgBeat.com for all of the coverage of the Arkansas A&M series and all the games moving forward the rest of the season.
Hutch, thanks for joining us. I have a feeling we're going to be catching up with you again during the postseason.
Yeah, sounds good. Anytime.
Appreciate it. All right, that's Andrew Hutchinson from HawgBeat. I'm Chris Lee of the 14. Thanks for watching. Subscribe to our YouTube channel if you haven't, and we'll see you again very soon.